society, going against the flow. You see, bucking the trend. You see, this group of young men, contrast to the society, to the rest of society who were pagans and polytheists and mushriks. They believed in Allah Azza wa Jalla, and they worshipped Him and submitted themselves to Him as Muslims. You see, obviously, since they were going against the flow, and their belief and their practice were so different than everyone else, including their own family members, they faced hostility, they faced enmity, you see, and eventually they faced persecution. This persecution reached the stage of threat on their lives. Finally, they were given an ultimatum to either renounce their religion or to suffer death. Then they conferred amongst themselves. They held a little conference, and this conference is mentioned in the Holy Quran. They asked themselves, should we abandon our faith? Should we renounce our faith in Allah? Should we move away from the worship of Allah with Tawheed to worshiping so many gods? Should we move away from submission of Allah to submitting to everyone and everything else, basically to our hawa, to our desires? Then inevitably, they concluded that we would suffer the greatest loss if we did this. We cannot renounce our faith in Allah. We cannot renounce our belief also in Allah. They felt thus they cannot renounce their faith in Allah, but because of the persecution and the danger of their lives, they fled from their homes and their loved ones. You see, they did a hijrah basically. They fled with their faith and retreated to the cave, which is, you know, the calf that's mentioned in this surah. And they worshipped Allah in secret. You see, here is where the miracle occurred. Allah made them sleep for 309 years. They were put to sleep because they were too pure for their own time. People did not understand them. You see, Allah wanted their people basically to make this discovery, to know about Allah's miracle, about Allah's basically quwwah, you know, his might and strength. Allah's miracle in honor also of the good believers, you see, and take them also as an example of devoted worshippers. You see, the lesson of this story is that these youth, and there's some scholars say that, you know, they were teenagers basically, they were very young. They saw, you know, beyond their power, beyond the glitter, beyond the wealth of their people. And after all those, all those things that basically bring forth, you know, person basically, it somehow, it's like a magnet, you know, all this wealth and riches and glitter, it's like a magnet, you know, to us. We are da'if, you know, we're weak. But after all those, these youth basically stayed firm in their religion. And the second story basically is the owner of 2 gardens and his friend. You see, the story revolves around a rich man who owned 2 huge gardens that produced lots of fruits and plants. The rich man never thanked Allah for these blessings. He had a good friend who advised him to repent and go back to Allah's path. However, the rich man refused and challenged his friend that nothing will ever happen to him in his garden. You see, he became boastful and arrogant. He said, look at this wealth. Look at this honor and this power and this fame. You see, and he was boasting. As he was boasting, you see, he started muttering something else. He said, مَا أَظُنُّ أَن تَبِيدَ هَذِهِ أَبَدًا. That's what the Quran says. He said, I do not think all this riches and wealth will ever expire. Then he progressed further and said, وَمَا أَظُنُّ السَّاعَةَ قَائِمًا وَلَا قَائِمًا. Basically, he said, I do not think there will be a day of reckoning. SubhanAllah, he committed an act of kufr. He denied the day of judgment. You see, then he progressed further and said, وَلَئِنْ رُدِدْتَ إِلَىٰ رَبِّي لَأَجِدَنَّ خَيْرًا مِنْهَا مُنْقَلَبًا. You see, he said, in fact, if I am returned to my Lord, I will discover even more and even better over there with Allah. You see, in these verses, Allahu Akbar. You see, and in this is the power of the Holy Quran and eloquence. You see, in 3 sentences, Allah informs us of the corrupting and corrosive and deluded nature of wealth. When man becomes wealthy, he becomes deluded. Wealth clouds his judgment. Wealth and riches place a veil over his eyes. They make his vision murky and murky, and he cannot see the truth from falsehood. He said, I do not think these wealth will ever expire. Not only did he believed that his wealth will expire, he denied the day of judgment. His delusion took him further, and he said, if by chance there is a day of reckoning, Allah will give me even more in the hereafter. SubhanAllah. I mean, that is certainty, isn't it? Then his companions turned to him, his companion, he was a pious man. He said, why do you boast? Why don't you say, MashaAllah, la quwwata illa billah? Why don't you humble yourself before your Lord? He said, قال له صاحبه وهو يحاوره أكفرت بالذي خلق من تراب ثم من نطفة ثم سواءك رجلا. Do you disbelieve in Allah who created you from dust, then out of a sperm drop, then fashioned you into a man? Then he said, لكنه هو الله ربي ولا أشرك بربي أحدا. But as for me, he is Allah, my Lord, and none shall I associate with my Lord. Words of a believer indeed. And while boasting, his arrogance led him to hold his companion in contempt and turned to his companion and started boasting. I am better than you. I can summon great numbers than you. I have a khutbah, but I don't have enough time, brothers. I came very late, I'm sorry. But basically, the moral of this story is basically all his riches was destroyed. Then he came into his senses. He said, woe is me, would I have ascribed honors to my Lord and cherisher? You see, despite observing the riches and strength of this rich man, see, the poor man did not become deluded, but rather stayed firm in his faith and disbelief. And then the third story is about Nabiyyuna Musa alayhi salam and Al-Khidr. Musa alayhi salam thought he was the most knowledgeable man, but he found out that there was a man who was more knowledgeable than he is. Then he learned the hidden meaning, the profound truth, and the incalculable hidden wisdom in the laws set by Allah throughout the universe. You see, the lesson of this story is that even the prophets of Allah have limited knowledge of the unseen. But eventually, Musa alayhi salam himself eventually learned that there are hidden dimensions and he could not perceive it because Allah chose to make it hidden. Because, some of us are not basically fit to receive some knowledge. And then the fourth story is about the two-horned king, Dhul Qarnayn. And basically he was a very, very mighty emperor who ruled a vast amount of land and people. And the moral here is that, despite of his wealth, his power, his knowledge, his military prowess, he did not become deluded by his wealth, power, and he stayed firm in his belief in Allah, and he stayed a humble servant to Allah. أقول قولي هذا واستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله. قال الله تعالى: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله